All right, so this is an issue that I see game designers struggle with the most, and this is the issue of game mechanics that punish players. Game mechanics that punish players are both breaking their immersion and taking agency away from them. It is not a game's place to punish the strategic mistakes of its players, let alone punish them for playing the game in the first place. These are the jobs of their opponents. Also, here I mean the game system mechanics, or the game system's mechanics, not CPU enemies and PCs in some games, especially video games, who absolutely are opponents. In terms of theory, it's also unfair for the competition, even when applied universally. Examples of punishing players are found in every knock game, or at least I can't think of any exceptions to this off the top of my head. In many cases, this takes the form of punishments from simulation, which can also take the form of needless time wasters. In RPGs and many video games, including MMOs, death mechanics almost universally punish players, and exceptions here will find other ways to punish their players, rest assured. Sometimes punishments can just be obstacles, whether random or triggered by the player's game state, or other sorts of time wasters like grinding, gathering quests, not tied to exploration or other mechanics. A great example is Final Fantasy Tactics and the various penalties imposed by judges when you break the randomly generated and extremely arbitrary rules for the game's turn-based battle system, which plays out like a board game. Here, the rules violations can happen as a result of either the AI's actions or some other factor out of the player's control. And then they just get penalized for it. The judge will call a violation, and uh, it'll mess up their battle. And so this not game punishes you for things you didn't even do. Another important example of games punishing players is Magic the Gathering's Commander and Commander-based formats. As stated before, these formats are fundamentally non-viable as games to the extent that if Magic were ever fixed, then Commander would turn gameplay back into a not game. Among the issues of Magic as a whole, Commander specifically punishes players who get eliminated, much like a board game, which completely removes them from the competition, stripping them of all of their agency while the game continues. Now we can talk about board games. A cruder and much more sadistic predecessor to the Commander problem, board games punish players on a genre-wide scale. It may be possible to design around this in board games, but there isn't really a point since board games can't be games. They'd still have to tackle the problem of lacking customization of strategy, not taking agency away from players, requiring strategy to win, which requires victory not be random, etc., etc. I'd love to see someone prove me wrong about board games, but I don't think it will ever happen. MTG's Commander format is just a Monopoly jail you get thrown in less, although you have to pay to get in and it's pay to win, so your competitiveness is relative to how much money you've spent. Let's talk more about video game death mechanics. Here are some ways they suck. Losing progress for no reason, having to wait to respawn with a timer that can get longer and punish me more if I suck at playing, losing items and then sometimes having to run back to where the game took them from your character, uh, not even find them as a generated quest or anything. There's no game reason for such a thing to happen, it's really just there to make you have less fun. Sometimes a video game may only have a certain number of tries, and when you lose all of those tries, you have to start all over from the beginning, losing all of your progress. I hate all of this so much. Next, let's talk about tabletop RPG death mechanics. This seems to be getting a lot of attention recently, so that's good to see. It would just be better to see these fixes in the actual games rather than just being talked about by the players who are somehow smarter than the game designers because they see all of these obvious problems. Character death is not the end of a hero's story. It's just a new story arc, a change of scene. The right answer is simply that player characters, as the heroes of the story, have plot armor. If you don't understand this very fundamental rule, allow me to explain. If a character's death simply ends the character, then there's no more problems for them to solve, no more quests, no more story. The game stops being played. What seems to trip up every GM and DM who isn't on this page yet is this notion that plot armor creates all of these problems and ruins their game. It doesn't. You're just doing it wrong. So here I'll cover how to do it from a number of different genre standpoints uh, slash gameplay styles. The simple direction, though, is that actions have consequences. It's the same with GMs who can't figure out how to use flying and teleportation in their games. If a fight is happening and the players teleport away to avoid the danger, that's not game breaking, that's an action that has consequences. Now, whatever danger they avoided is unimpeded in whatever it's doing. The players just let the villain succeed or run free. When they go back to that town, maybe it's destroyed and the people left. Maybe it got rebuilt and the people resent the PCs. Maybe it's now occupied and fortified by the villains. The same goes for flying. In a world where flying by magic is possible, maybe flying has its dangers. Maybe dragons don't like you flying wantonly over their domain without tribute and permission. Maybe fighting forces take more of an account for anti-aerial combat. Maybe flying high, surrounded by freezing wind and water vapor, is a good way to catch hypothermia. Maybe there are pterosaurs to watch out for. Anyway, back to RPG death mechanics. Let's first try high fantasy. Maybe the party has to get their friend's body so that it can get resurrected. If the party doesn't have enough to pay for a resurrection, maybe they need to borrow the money, and it's got strings attached, which become their next quest. Maybe they have to steal the money. Maybe it's just all the gold they earned on their last quest, and after resurrecting their friend, the party is now broke. Maybe the dead PC turns into a ghost that the party can interact with until they find a way to bring them back. Now that player can explore playing around with ghost mechanics, the party has a ghost on their team they can use, and the GM has a new opportunity to weave in a new plot thread. Maybe turning into a ghost was unexpected, and the party has to figure out why it happened and how to resurrect their friend if maybe regular resurrection doesn't work. Maybe now that they're a ghost, the character sees something that the living members of their party don't. The possibilities are truly endless, and now that I've pointed this out, I hope it's obvious why ending a character simply because they die is a violation of game design, or game running in the case of GMs and RPGs. Now let's see for a low level magic, a low magic or no magic setting. Yeah. Wait, did I say? Oh, I confused magic and fantasy. Sorry. In the first one, I said high fantasy. Here, I'm kind of going to either a low fantasy or a no magic setting, but it could be high fantasy, low magic anyway. Without magic, let's say. Maybe the character is either saved by bringing them to a doctor, or maybe the villains have a doctor and they're keeping the PC stable and captive when the party thought they were dead. Maybe the PC wakes up later and realizes they're not actually dead, and they overhear the villain's plans. Then the PC has to survive until the party shows up to rescue them, or maybe they have to find a way to reestablish contact or even escape. Maybe bring in some low level shaman magic to heal them, or even just herbalism to help stabilize them and then have them recover naturally. Remember, as the GM, you can say that anything happens, even when the mechanics of the game, which are wrong, tell you your player's character is dead. You are God in that game, and you can say otherwise, and you should. So for GMs, this doesn't mean players will go out of control because they have plot armor now. It means you always have something to use that carries the story forward for those characters with ever new opportunities for them to evolve. For game designers, I hope you realize now that players can handle more fun, especially when it comes to your game violating or phoned in death mechanics. It is not your job to take your game away from players, especially in design. It is, in fact, quite the opposite.